The dust-laden wind carried the distant rumble of an approaching stagecoach as Zara Blackburn clutched her weathered carpet bag, standing alone at the edge of Timber Creek's only road. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle baron named Henry Tillman, who had advertised for a bride in the Eastern papers. Zara's pale blue traveling dress, once crisp and proper when she departed Boston 3 weeks ago, now bore the marks of the arduous journey west. Her honey blonde hair, partially escaped from its pins, fluttered in the breeze as she squinted toward the approaching cloud of dust. This was at the moment her new life would begin. The town of Timber Creek, Wyoming Territory, was smaller than she'd imagined. A single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, most with false fronts attempting to create an illusion of grandeur. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats paused to stare at the newcomer, while a few women in practical frontier dresses whispered behind raised hands. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before her, and the driver tipped his hat. "Miss Blackburn, welcome to Timber Creek." Zara smiled tightly, her throat dry with nerves. "Thank you, sir. Is anyone meeting me?" The driver frowned, glancing around the street before jumping down to retrieve her trunk. "Mr. Tillman usually sends someone, might be running late." As Zara stood uncertainly beside her trunk and bag, the town's general store door swung open. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim pants and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms. His dark blonde hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and his face, though weathered by sun and wind, suggested he wasn't much older than 30. His eyes, the clear blue of a summer sky, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You must be Henry Tillman's mail-order bride," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough as if he didn't use it much. Zara straightened her spine. "Yes, I'm Zara Blackburn. Is Mr. Tillman unable to meet me himself?" Something flickered across the man's face, a tightening around his eyes. "Name's Xavier Nash. I own the ranch neighboring Tillman's." He gestured toward the distant hills. "Henry's not here." "I see," Zara replied, trying to mask her disappointment. "When will he arrive?" Nash's jaw tightened. "Miss Blackburn, there's something you should—" "Ah, there she is." A booming voice interrupted. Zara turned to see a portly man in an expensive suit hurrying toward them, a gold watch chain gleaming across his ample stomach. His face was flushed from exertion, small eyes peering out from beneath bushy eyebrows. "Miss Blackburn, welcome, welcome. I'm Mayor Wilson. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Tillman." He reached for her hand, pumping it enthusiastically. "We've been so looking forward to your arrival." "Thank you, Mayor Wilson," Zara replied, gently extracting her hand. "Where is Mr. Tillman?" The mayor's smile faltered slightly. "Well, you see, he's been delayed by business, but he's arranged for you to stay at the boarding house until the wedding." "Everything's paid for, that won't be necessary," Xavier Nash interrupted, his voice cutting through the mayor's rambling. He stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow across them both. With a movement so swift it left Zara breathless, Nash reached out and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused against her gloved fingers. "She's mine," he said simply, his eyes never leaving Zara's face. Zara's mouth fell open in shock. "I beg your pardon," the mayor sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "Now see here, Nash, this is completely inappropriate. Miss Blackburn is contracted to marry Henry Tillman." Xavier's grip on Zara's hand remained firm but gentle. "Henry Tillman is dead," he said flatly. "Has been for 3 weeks." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as Zara processed his words. "Dead," she whispered. "Yes, madam," Xavier confirmed, his voice softening as he looked at her. "Caught in a flash flood while checking on a broken fence line, they found his body 2 days later. But," the mayor's voice rose to a squeak. "The arrangements, the wedding—" Xavier's eyes hardened as he turned to the mayor. "You were going to marry her off to his cousin Gerald, weren't you? The one who's now inherited the ranch." The mayor's silence was answer enough. "Gerald Tillman is a drunk and a gambler who's run through most of his own money," Xavier continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. And he's already got a wife back east that no one here talks about. Zara felt her knees weaken. Everything she'd planned, everything she'd hoped for, crumbled around her. She'd spent her last dollars on the journey west, selling her mother's silver to pay for the final leg of the trip. There was nothing to go back to in Boston, her family home sold to pay her father's debts, her position as a teacher's assistant filled by another. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why would you tell people I'm yours?" Xavier Nash's gaze softened as he looked down at her. "Because Gerald Tillman is riding in from Cheyenne tomorrow to claim both the ranch and you, and I'm not about to let a decent woman be tricked into that situation." "But you don't even know me," Zara protested. A small smile lifted one corner of his mouth. "I know enough. Henry showed me your letters. He was a good man, Miss Blackburn. He spoke highly of you." The mayor cleared his throat. "Now see here, Nash, you can't just claim another man's bride to be." "She's not Tillman's anything anymore," Xavier replied evenly. "And I'm offering Miss Blackburn protection and a choice." He turned back to Zara, his blue eyes intent. "You can stay at my ranch as my guest until you decide what you want to do, no strings attached, or you can stay in town and deal with Gerald Tillman tomorrow. Your choice." Zara looked from the mayor's flustered face to Xavier Nash's steady gaze. Common sense told her to be wary of both men's offers, but something in Nash's direct blue eyes spoke of honesty. And if what he said about Gerald Tillman was true. "I believe I'll accept Mr. Nash's hospitality," she said firmly, "at least until I can determine my options." The mayor's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "This is highly irregular. What will people say?" "They'll say she's under my protection," Xavier replied, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. He released Zara's hand and moved to pick up her trunk. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, lives at the ranch. She'll be proper chaperone enough for anyone with sense." With that, he hefted her trunk onto one broad shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "My wagon's behind the general store, if you'll follow me, Miss Blackburn." Zara nodded, gathering her carpet bag and following him, intensely aware of the curious stares from townspeople who had gathered to witness the exchange. "Thank you," she said quietly when they were out of earshot, "though I'm not entirely sure what I'm thanking you for yet." Xavier Nash's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Just giving you a chance to make your own decisions, Miss Blackburn. Something tells me you've had precious few of those lately." The accuracy of his assessment startled her into silence. Nash's wagon was a sturdy farm wagon with a bench seat at the front. He placed her trunk in the back, then offered his hand to help her up. His touch was brief but steady, and Zara found herself seated beside him before she could properly contemplate the strangeness of her situation. As they pulled away from town, Zara finally found her voice again. "Mr. Nash, while I appreciate your intervention, I must ask, why did you claim me as yours? Surely there were other ways to prevent this situation." Xavier kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. "Gerald Tillman respects only one thing in this world, and that's another man's claim, property, ownership." His mouth twisted with distaste on the last word. He wouldn't have backed down for anything less. "I see," Zara said, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. "And what happens when Mr. Tillman arrives tomorrow?" "He'll be angry," Xavier said matter-of-factly. "But he won't challenge me directly, not worth the risk to him." "Are you dangerous, Mr. Nash?" Zara asked, suddenly aware of how little she knew about this man. Xavier glanced at her, something like amusement flickering in his eyes. "I try not to be, Miss Blackburn, but I've had to be hard out here to survive. We all have." They traveled in silence for a while, the wagon wheels bumping over the rutted dirt road. Around them, the Wyoming landscape stretched in every direction, rolling plains dotted with sagebrush, distant mountains rising purple against the horizon. "It's beautiful," Zara said softly. "Different from Boston, I imagine," Xavier replied. "Very, but I think I might grow to love it." The words surprised her as they left her mouth, but she realized they were true. Despite everything, there was something about this wild, open country that called to her. "Henry's ranch," she began, then stopped herself. "I suppose it's not his anymore." Xavier's hands tightened on the reins. "No. And it's a shame. Henry built that place from nothing, worked hard, treated his men well." He glanced at her. He was looking forward to your arrival, said your letters showed intelligence and grit, said that's what a man needs in a wife out here. Zara felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them away. She'd never met Henry Tillman, but over months of correspondence, she'd developed a respect for him. He'd been honest about the hardships of frontier life, but had also written of his hopes to build something lasting. Something they could share. "What will I do now?" she whispered, the question more for herself than for him. "You have options," Xavier said. "There's stage fare back east if that's what you want, or you could stay in these parts. Town needs a schoolteacher." Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that just last week. "A teacher," Zara straightened. "I was a teacher's assistant in Boston," Xavier nodded. "Thought that might interest you from what Henry said of your letters." They crested a small rise and Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, nodding toward the valley below. Zara followed his gaze to see a sprawling ranch nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. A large two-story house built of golden logs stood at the center, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. Smoke curled from the chimney, and even from this distance she could see cattle grazing in the pastures beyond. "The Double N," Xavier said, a hint of pride in his voice, "started with 20 acres and 6 cows 10 years ago. It's impressive," Zara said honestly. "You've built something wonderful here." Something in her tone made him look at her sharply. "It's not what you signed up for, I know." "No," she agreed. "But life rarely gives us exactly what we expect, does it?" Xavier's expression softened slightly. "No, it surely doesn't." He clicked to the horses, and they continued down the slope toward the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy turned out to be a formidable woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Xavier's explanation with increasing outrage at the mayor's deception. "Shameful," she declared. "Trying to trick a young woman like that. Well, you'll stay right here, Miss Blackburn, until you decide what's best for you. We've plenty of room, and it'll be nice having another woman about the place." Zara was shown to a comfortable bedroom with windows that looked out over the pastures. After weeks of travel, the clean sheets and soft mattress seemed like unimaginable luxury. That evening, she joined Xavier and Mrs. Abernathy for dinner in the spacious kitchen. The food was simple but plentiful: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. "Tell us about Boston, Miss Blackburn," Mrs. Abernathy encouraged. "I've never been further east than St. Louis myself." Zara spoke of the city's cobblestone streets and grand buildings, of teaching at the girls' school, and of the circumstances that had led her to answer Henry Tillman's advertisement. "My father died last year," she explained. "The debts were substantial. The house had to be sold, and my position at the school didn't pay enough for independent living." She looked down at her plate. "When I saw Mr. Tillman's advertisement, it seemed a chance for a new beginning. And it still can be," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "Just perhaps not the one you planned." Xavier had remained mostly silent during dinner, but now he spoke. "Gerald Tillman will arrive tomorrow. He'll likely come here." "Let him come," Mrs. Abernathy said fiercely. "I'll have my shotgun ready." Xavier's mouth twitched. "I don't think that will be necessary, Mrs. Abernathy, but I would appreciate it if you would ensure Miss Blackburn is never alone with him." "Of course," the older woman agreed. Later, as Zara prepared for bed, she stood by the window, looking out at the vast night sky scattered with more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. The day's events swirled in her mind: the shock of learning of Henry Tillman's death, the mayor's deception, and most of all, the strange, intense man who had claimed her as his in order to protect her. "She's mine," he had said, and though the words had been spoken only as a shield, they had resonated within her in a way she couldn't explain. She slept deeply that night, exhausted from travel and emotion, and woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. After dressing in one of her simpler dresses, a dusty rose cotton with minimal fuss, she made her way downstairs. Mrs. Abernathy was at the stove, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," Zara admitted. "May I help with anything?" "You can set the table if you like. Xavier's already been up for hours, always is. He'll be in shortly." As if summoned by his name, the door opened, and Xavier entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and morning air. He'd removed his hat, and his hair was damp, as if he'd dunked his head in water before coming in. "Morning," he said, nodding to both women. "Sleep well, Miss Blackburn." "Very well, thank you," Zara replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. Breakfast was a hearty affair of bacon, eggs, and biscuits with gravy. Zara found herself hungrier than she'd been in days, the fresh air and good food reviving her appetite. "I need to ride out to check the north pasture today," Xavier said, addressing Mrs. Abernathy. "Will you be all right here?" The older woman snorted. "We'll be fine. I told you I've got my shotgun if Gerald Tillman shows his face." Xavier's expression suggested he wasn't entirely joking. "Try not to shoot him unless absolutely necessary." He turned to Zara. "I'm sorry to leave you on your first day here." "Please don't worry about me," Zara assured him. "You've already done far more than I could have expected from a stranger." Something flickered in his eyes at the word stranger. "I should be back by mid-afternoon," he said, rising from the table. "If Tillman comes before then and gives you any trouble, Danny knows to ride out and find me." He nodded toward the bunkhouse visible through the window, where a young ranch hand was crossing the yard. After Xavier left, Mrs. Abernathy showed Zara around the house. It was larger than it had appeared from the outside, with a spacious parlor, dining room, Xavier's study, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. The furnishings were solid and well-made, if not fancy. "He built most of it himself," Mrs. Abernathy said proudly, running her hand along a carved wooden banister. "Xavier's got a talent with wood, made this banister from a lightning-struck oak on the property." Zara trailed her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful." "He's a good man," the older woman said, watching Zara closely. "Keeps to himself mostly. Folks in town think he's standoffish, but he's just careful with who he lets close." "How did he come to be here?" Zara asked, curious about the man who had so dramatically altered her situation. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Came west after the war like a lot of men. He was just a boy when he fought, couldn't have been more than 17 or 18 by the time it ended. Never talks about it, but I know it left its marks." She glanced at Zara. "Bought this land when nobody thought anything could be made of it, worked himself half to death proving them wrong." They spent the morning in domestic tasks, Zara insisting on helping with the laundry and bread baking to earn her keep. Around noon, Mrs. Abernathy's prediction came true. The sound of approaching horses drew them to the front porch. 3 riders approached a heavyset man in an expensive but rumpled suit flanked by 2 rough-looking cowboys. "That'll be Gerald Tillman," Mrs. Abernathy said grimly, positioning herself slightly in front of Zara. The man reined in his horse and dismounted awkwardly, his face flushed with heat and exertion. Up close, Zara could see a family resemblance to the image of Henry Tillman. She'd been sent the same broad forehead and square jaw, but where Henry's expression in the photograph had been kind, Gerald's eyes were small and calculating. "Where is she?" he demanded without preamble. "Where's the woman Henry sent for?" Mrs. Abernathy drew herself up. "Good afternoon to you too, Mr. Tillman. If you're referring to Miss Blackburn, she's right here and she's under the protection of this house." Gerald's gaze fixed on Zara, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. Something in his expression made her skin crawl. "So you're the mail-order bride," he said, his tone making the words sound dirty somehow. "Pretty enough, I suppose. Wilson told me Nash has made some ridiculous claim on you, but we all know that's horseshit. You were contracted to marry a Tillman, and I'm the only Tillman left." "I was contracted to marry Henry Tillman," Zara replied, finding her voice. "I had no agreement with you, sir." Gerald's face darkened. "Don't get uppity with me, girl. You came west to be a wife, and that's what you'll be. I've got the ranch now, and I need a woman to keep house." "Mr. Tillman," Mrs. Abernathy cut in, her voice sharp as a whip. "Miss Blackburn is not a piece of property to be inherited. She's a free woman who will make her own choices." Gerald took a step forward, his hand moving to his belt where a pistol was holstered. "I don't recall asking for your opinion, you old—" The sharp click of a rifle being cocked cut him off. Mrs. Abernathy now held a shotgun, its barrels pointed squarely at Gerald's midsection. "I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you," she said calmly, "and I certainly wouldn't take another step toward this porch." The two cowboys with Gerald shifted nervously, their hands hovering near their own weapons. "You're making a mistake," Gerald growled. "Nash can't protect her forever." "The law's on my side." She came west on Henry's dime, with the understanding she'd marry a Tillman. "The law recognizes her right to choose her own husband," Mrs. Abernathy replied, "and she's chosen not to marry you." The standoff might have escalated further if not for the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Xavier rode into the yard at a gallop, pulling his horse to a sharp stop and dismounting in one fluid motion. His expression was cold as he strode toward the group, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. "Problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. Gerald turned to face him, his face flushed with anger. "You know damn well what the problem is, Nash. You've got no right to interfere with my affairs." "Miss Blackburn isn't your affair," Xavier replied evenly. "She's under my protection now." "Protection?" Gerald sneered. "Is that what you're calling it? Town's already talking about how you claimed her right off the stage." "Didn't waste any time, did you?" Xavier's expression didn't change, but Zara saw his jaw tighten. "You should leave now, Tillman, or what? You'll shoot me over some mail-order bride." Gerald laughed, the sound ugly. "She's not worth the trouble, Nash. Though I'm curious why you suddenly need a woman. Last I heard, you weren't interested in taking a wife." "Last warning," Xavier said quietly. "Get off my land." Something in his tone must have finally penetrated Gerald's bravado. The man glanced from Xavier to Mrs. Abernathy's shotgun, then back again. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing toward his horse. "She was promised to a Tillman." "She was promised to Henry," Xavier corrected. "And he's gone. Miss Blackburn owes you nothing." The three men mounted their horses, Gerald's face a mask of thwarted rage. "You'll regret this, Nash. Nobody crosses me." Xavier didn't respond, standing motionless until the riders had disappeared down the road. Only then did he turn to the porch, his eyes immediately finding Zara's. "Are you all right?" he asked. Zara nodded, suddenly realizing she was trembling slightly. "Yes, Mrs. Abernathy was quite formidable." The older woman lowered her shotgun with a huff. "Man's a waste of good air, always has been." Xavier mounted the porch steps, his gaze still on Zara. "I'm sorry you had to face that. It's hardly your fault," she replied. "In fact, I should be thanking you again for your intervention. It seems you were right about Mr. Tillman's character." Xavier's mouth tightened. "He'll be back, maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. He doesn't like being denied anything he wants." "What can he actually do?" Zara asked. Xavier sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Legally, not much, but Gerald has connections in the county, friends in positions of influence, and he's not above using less official means to get what he wants." Mrs. Abernathy made a disgusted sound. "He's a bully and a coward, but don't you worry, dear. We won't let him near you." Zara appreciated their protection, but a growing part of her chafed at being the cause of such trouble. "Perhaps I should consider returning east after all," she said reluctantly. "I wouldn't want to bring further problems to your door." "Is that what you want?" Xavier asked, his blue eyes searching her face. "To go back," Zara considered the question honestly. "Return to what?" She had no home, no family, and her teaching position had been filled. And despite the complications, there was something about this wild country that called to her. "No," she admitted, "but I don't wish to be a burden." "You're not," Xavier said simply. "Stay. At least until you decide what you want to do next." That evening, after Mrs. Abernathy had retired, Zara found herself unable to sleep. She made her way downstairs, thinking to make a cup of tea, and found Xavier in the kitchen, a mug of coffee before him as he studied what looked like ledger books. He looked up at her entrance, closing the book. "Can't sleep." "Too much on my mind, I suppose," she admitted, moving to the stove where the kettle still steamed. "May I?" he nodded, watching as she prepared her tea. When she turned back to him, cup in hand, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you like company, or would you prefer to be alone?" She asked. "Company would be welcome," he said, a small smile softening his features. "If you don't mind mine." Zara took the offered seat, warming her hands on the teacup. "Mr. Nash, Xavier," he interrupted gently. "If we're going to be sharing midnight tea, I think you can use my given name." "Xavier," she repeated, liking the feel of it. "Then you must call me Zara," he nodded, waiting for her to continue. I've been thinking about what you said about options, the teaching position in town. Is that truly a possibility? I believe so, he replied. Town's growing, more families arriving every month. The current teacher, Mrs. Paulson, is expecting a baby and has said she won't return after Christmas. Zara felt a spark of hope. Teaching was something she knew, something she loved. I would need somewhere to live. There are rooms above the mercantile, Xavier said. Or, he hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully, you could continue to stay here. It's a long ride to town every day, but not impossible. Zara studied him across the table. In the lamplight, his features were softer, the hard lines of his face gentled by shadows. Why are you helping me, Xavier? Truly, he was silent for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in his hands. Henry was my friend, he said finally, one of the few I've had out here. When he decided to advertise for a bride, I thought he was crazy. A small smile touched his lips. But then your letters started coming and he'd read parts to me sometimes. He respected you, said you had spirit. You read my letters? Zara wasn't sure whether to be embarrassed or touched. Not all of them, just the parts he shared. Xavier's eyes met hers. You wrote about wanting to start a small school on the ranch someday, about bringing books west. Henry said you understood what building something meant. Zara felt a pang of grief for the man she'd never met but had come to know through months of correspondence. He seemed like a good man. He was, Xavier agreed. When I heard about the accident, I rode out to his place, found your latest letter on his desk. He died before he could respond to tell you he was looking forward to your arrival. His jaw tightened. Then I heard Gerald talking in town about his inheritance coming on the stage. Took me a minute to realize he meant you. So you intervened, Zara finished for him. I couldn't let him trick you, Xavier said simply. Not after everything you'd already been through to get here. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Zara. This was not a man given to pretense or flowery words. His actions spoke for him, the protection he'd offered, the choices he'd preserved for her. Thank you, she said softly, for giving me the freedom to choose my own path. Their eyes held across the table, and something shifted in the space between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Two people who understood the value of independence, of building something meaningful from nothing. The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Zara rode into town with Xavier to meet with the school board, who were delighted to find a qualified teacher so readily available. She would start after Christmas, giving her time to prepare and to find suitable accommodations. In the meantime, she threw herself into ranch life, helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, learning to garden in the kitchen plot, and even trying her hand at riding. Xavier proved to be a patient teacher, selecting a gentle mare named Daisy for her first attempts. Keep your back straight, he instructed, walking beside the horse as Zara tentatively guided it around the corral. That's it, you're a natural. Zara laughed, feeling anything but natural as she clutched the saddle horn. I doubt that very much. But day by day, her confidence grew both on horseback and in her new surroundings. The vast open spaces that had initially overwhelmed her now filled her with a sense of possibility. The big sky, the distant mountains, the endless rolling prairie, they spoke of freedom in a way Boston's narrow streets never had. Gerald Tillman made one more attempt to press his claim, approaching Zara in town while she was selecting fabric for curtains in her future classroom. Xavier had been across the street at the blacksmith's, but he'd appeared at her side within moments, as if he had some sixth sense where her safety was concerned. Is there a problem here? He'd asked, his voice carrying enough of an edge that Gerald had backed away, muttering about unfinished business. He's all talk, Xavier had assured her afterward, but stay close anyway. And she did stay close, finding herself seeking out Xavier's company even when there was no practical reason to do so. She enjoyed their conversations about books, about the ranch, about her plans for the school. He was well read for a rancher, with a small but carefully chosen library in his study that he encouraged her to use freely. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit in the parlor, Zara reading aloud while Xavier worked on small wood carvings, delicate figures of animals and birds that revealed an unexpected artistic sensitivity in his calloused hands. It was during one such evening, nearly a month after her arrival, that Zara realized something had changed between them. She had been reading a passage from Wuthering Heights, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the text, when she glanced up to find Xavier watching her, his carving forgotten in his hands. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Am I reading too dramatically?" "No," he said softly. "I was just thinking how right you look. Here." The simple words sent a flush of warmth through her. "I feel right here," she admitted, "more than I expected to." He set aside his carving and leaned forward slightly. "Zara, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, the teaching position starts after Christmas. Have you decided where you'll live?" It wasn't what she'd expected him to ask. I've been looking at the rooms above the mercantile. They're small but adequate." Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's sensible." "Yes," she agreed, feeling strangely disappointed. "Sensible." They lapsed into silence, the book forgotten in Zara's lap. Finally, Xavier spoke again. "Or you could stay here." Zara looked up sharply. "As your guest." "That's very kind, but not as my guest," he interrupted, his voice low and serious. "As my wife." The world seemed to stop for a moment. "Your wife?" Xavier set aside his carving and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "I know it's sudden, and I know you came west to marry another man. But these past weeks," he paused, searching for words, "I've come to care for you, Zara, more than I expected to, more than I thought possible." Zara's heart pounded in her chest. "Xavier," he took her hand gently in his, "I'm not asking you to love me, not yet. But I think we could build something good together, a partnership." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "You want to teach, and I would never ask you to give that up. The ranch is close enough to town that you could ride in each day. And in the summers, you could have your school here like you wrote to Henry about." Zara was speechless, her mind whirling with the unexpected proposal. "You don't have to answer now," Xavier continued, misinterpreting her silence. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know that there's a place for you here, a permanent one if you want it. When you claimed me at the stagecoach," Zara said slowly, finding her voice at last, "was this what you intended all along?" Xavier shook his head firmly. "No, I only meant to protect you from Gerald. To give you choices." A rueful smile touched his lips. "Falling in love with you wasn't part of the plan." Love, the word hung in the air between them. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you, Zara. I didn't expect to, but I do." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. She had come west prepared to build a life with a stranger, to grow into affection through shared work and respect. But what had blossomed between her and Xavier in these few short weeks was something different, something that had taken root in her heart when she wasn't looking. "I think," she said carefully, "that I may have fallen in love with you too." The hope that blazed in his eyes took her breath away. "Truly," in answer, Zara leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as Xavier's arms came around her, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Zara whispered. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Timber Creek, with Mrs. Abernathy beaming in the front pew and the ranch hands dressed in their Sunday best. The town turned out in force, curious to witness the union that had begun so unusually at the stagecoach stop. Gerald Tillman was conspicuously absent, having left for Cheyenne shortly after his last confrontation with Xavier. Rumor had it he'd gambled away most of his cousin's ranch already and was looking for new opportunities elsewhere. After the simple ceremony, they rode back to the double and now their home together. As they approached the rise where Xavier had first shown her the ranch, he pulled the wagon to a stop. "I have something for you," he said, reaching beneath the seat and pulling out a small wooden box. Zara opened it to find a delicately carved wooden rose, so realistic she almost expected it to feel like velvet beneath her fingers. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I carved it the night I asked you to marry me," Xavier said. "Couldn't sleep afterward, too happy." He smiled, taking her hand. "I wanted you to have something that wouldn't wilt, something that would last." "Like us," Zara said softly. "Like us," he agreed, leaning in to kiss her. As they drove down toward their home, the setting sun painting the buildings in gold, Zara thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. She had left Boston to marry a stranger, only to find love with a man who had claimed her with two simple words: "She's mine." Words that had begun as protection had become a promise, one that Xavier Nash would spend the rest of his life fulfilling. 5 years later, the double N had grown, as had the Nash family. Two children, a boy of 4 named Henry, after the man who had inadvertently brought them together, and a baby girl called Emma filled the house with laughter and energy. Zara continued to teach at the town school, riding in 3 days a week while Mrs. Abernathy watched the children. In the summers, as Xavier had promised, she ran a small school on the ranch itself, teaching the ranch hands' children alongside her own. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she'd arrived on the stagecoach, Xavier carved her another wooden rose to add to her collection, a growing testament to a love that had begun with a stranger's protective claim and blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined. "She's mine," he had said that day, taking her hand. And every day since, they had chosen each other, building a life as vast and promising as the western sky above them.